There are hundreds of basic and alternate recipes in Satisfactory 1.0. Some of them are absolutely amazing, whilst others not so much. So I've made it my mission in Satisfactory to compare every single recipe in the game to inform you guys on what the best and worst recipes are. So welcome to the best recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 series. Today's video is all about the Encased industrial beams. The Encased industrial beam has three main uses, the first of which is to make the heavy modular frame, which itself is then used to make a load more very important items in Satisfactory. The second one is involving nuclear power and uranium fuel rods, which again is rather important. The third item has nothing to do with crafting, but instead it's the Mark IV conveyor belt, which can handle 480 items per minute. This is unlocked in Logistics Mark IV Tier 5 of the hub, along with the conveyor lift and the trucks. In fact, as we can see, this has a lot of uses other than just crafting. However, the odds are you're probably making it wrong. So today we are going to be comparing the basic recipe to two other recipes that I recommend you might use instead. Everything that I will be showing you in today's video is purely factual. If you're going to enjoy videos like this, make sure you are subscribed. I've got a bunch more of these tutorials on my channel and more coming out soon. Let's start with the basic Encased industrial beam recipe, for which I won't be using any alternate recipes except for one, which I'll be showing you in the second graph. So, to make our 10 Encased industrial beams, we are going to be needing 60 concrete per minute, or 180 limestone. You can find this pretty much all over the world. And for reference, a 1 Mark II miner on an impure node at 250% clock speed gives you 150 limestone per minute. So as long as it's not an impure node, if it's normal or pure, you will have enough just from one node to be able to do this, and probably with a lot more limestone left to spare. Secondly, we then need our 30 steel beams. You can craft these 30 steel beams from 120 steel ingots, which, as the number suggests, isn't as cheap. You then require 120 iron ore and 120 coal per minute. So in total, for the basic Encased industrial beam recipe, just to make 10 by the way, we need 120 iron ore, 120 coal, and 180 limestone per minute for the basic recipe. And here we are in our second example, the Encased industrial pipes. We are still making the 10 Encased industrial beam. It's still the exact same thing we are making, just the recipe is called pipe rather than beam. That's because of this. We'll get onto this in just a second. First of all, here we are using 50 concrete per minute, which is 10 less than our previous recipe. This means that we are saving 30 limestone per minute, which now means that you can now use a Mark II miner at 250% clock speed on an impure node to make the concrete needed for this. So you don't have to get an extra 30 concrete or extra 30 limestone. It's literally right there for you, which is fantastic. At first, a lot of people see this and think 60 steel pipes? Well, that's clearly double of what the previous steel recipe was, so I'm not going to bother using this. But let's have a look at the steel ingots. This requires 90 steel ingots per minute, and the basic requires 120. So you're saving 30 steel ingots, meaning you then end up saving 30 iron ore and 30 coal. So just by using this one alternate recipe, you save 30 limestone, 30 coal, and 30 iron ore from basically doing nothing. You're not adding any refineries, you're not adding water, you're literally just saving resources. There is no reason I can think of why to not use this recipe. It is generally incredible. Despite being factually incorrect, some people might still defend the basic recipe, but I still don't recommend you use this, because it's just a waste of resources at that point. Saying that, however, we are not quite done with today's video. So we have to come over here to our starter factory to show you the reason as to why that is. And yes, I've got to play on like ultra low graphics, otherwise my PC would crash. As you can see, we've got a bunch of coal, iron, and limestone. Most of this is coming over here. The iron and the coal is making our steel ingots, whereas the limestone is going over to make our concrete. Our pipes then come down to here, into our assemblers to make our Encased industrial pipes. The reason why I wanted to show you this part very quickly is because I wanted to prove to you that it's worth it. I wouldn't be making this if it wasn't worth it, so if I'm using it in my own factory, I would then recommend it. I would never recommend a recipe that I don't personally use. Having said that, there's actually another very easy way to make this thing that could, again, save you on resources. For this example, we are hopping back over to our creative world, because there's a recipe in this foundry that I haven't yet gotten. I would also like to try and show you guys some other steel ingot recipes which you might prefer. Firstly, we've got the regular steel ingot itself, where if you were to make 10 of these steel ingots, you would need 10 iron ore and 10 coal. It's not bad, it's a 1:1:1 ratio. The second recipe is called the coke steel ingot. This requires 7.5 iron ore and 7.5 petroleum coke, which is made from heavy oil residue, which is then made from crude oil. So this does involve crude oil, but this time it's not a 1:1 ratio, it's a 3:4 ratio. So you're getting about 25% extra steel ingots if you were to use this recipe. The main downside, however, yes, you are saving iron, but you are using petroleum coke. So if you've got a bunch of this stuff lying around, you could, if you really wanted to, make some steel ingots with some iron. The third recipe, which is the compacted steel ingot, actually has the best ratio out of all 4 of these recipes that I'm going to show you today. With the iron ore, it's a 1:2, so you're doubling it, a 200% increase. And for the compact coal, it is a 400% increase. The reason as to why that is because for the compact coal, you need to use 2.5 coal, not too bad at all, but also 2.5 sulfur. And sulfur is quite a rare resource, so you might want to be using that carefully. If you have got a bunch of sulfur lying around with some iron and some coal and you do need steel, I actually kind of recommend this recipe if you so wish. Because again, you're saving on quite a lot of iron, quite a lot of coal, and of course you are using a bit of sulfur there as well to make the steel ingots. And of course we have got the converter now, so you can convert iron into sulfur or coal into sulfur. But these are the 2 resources that you're trying to save. But in case you're wondering, if you would like to craft your coal into the 2.5 sulfur that you then need to add into the steel ingots, this then requires let's say roughly 4.2 coal per minute and 0.2 reanimated SAM. So technically, you are still saving on coal if you were to get your coal, run it through the converter, and make sulfur, but you are going to be using a lot of power, as well as reanimated SAM, which of course is made from SAM, which is rather rare. And let's say you had some iron ore left over. You'll then have to use 6.25 iron ore to craft 2.5 sulfur, which really isn't that bad. And again, you're only using about 0.2 reanimated SAM. So if you did have some iron and some coal left over and you wanted to use the sulfur recipe, you can, but do bear in mind that this thing isn't necessarily cheap power-wise to run. But let's say you don't want to use sulfur and you don't want to use crude oil. The recipe that I recommend using, and probably the cheapest, especially early game, is the solid steel ingots recipe. This is because if we were to craft, again, 10 steel ingots per minute, we would only need 6.7 iron ingots and 6.7 coal. And essentially what you have to do is make your iron ingots before you add it to these steel ingots down here. This does mean that you are going to have to craft some extra smelters, which might take up some extra power, but smelters only cost like 4 power per minute each, which is one of the cheapest for any machine in the game. So that shouldn't be much of a concern, especially if you are mid to late game where you've already got fuel or nuclear set up. I do 100% recommend doing this. No crude oil, no sulfur, nothing. Just the same 2 resources you were using before, except you craft, again, the iron ingots earlier, so you save on coal, you save on iron, and overall it's really cool, especially if you utilize a couple more tricks. There's 2 recipes here that you can use in the refinery. One involves sulfuric acid, so I'm not even going to bother with that one. And the second one, which again, I actually recommend and I will be using in my own mega builds, is this build right here. So rather than using 6.67 iron ore, we are now just using 3.6. This might not sound like a massive change, but of course, the more iron ingots you use, let's say you're now making 162, rather than requiring 162.5 iron ore, it's now only 87.5 plus a tiny bit of water. This is a fantastic recipe if you are trying to save on resources, but of course you can use this for quite a lot of ingot, and of course quartz crystals. You could also do wet concrete, In fact, I've got an entire video talking about how awesome water is in Satisfactory, so I do recommend giving that a watch if you so wish. If there's anything that we've learned from today's video, it's this. The basic recipe just isn't good. You can use a bunch of other alternate recipes to then try to reduce the cost, or you could just use the Encased industrial pipe recipe. You can then save on coal, iron, and of course, limestone as well. There is no reason as to why I wouldn't recommend using that recipe. Despite that, of course, use what recipe you feel is the best. Again, this is your playthrough. I'm just here to give you guys some tips and tricks. But play the game in which you find the most entertaining, which if you like to waste more resources, you might enjoy the basic recipe. Regardless, that would just about do it for today. Thank you for watching. But before we go, a massive thank you to our members, Mau Mau, Skull and Hattie, Lo, Litormal, Chaos Rising, Cutthroat Zoo, Yummy Kel, and Tio Rico.